Welcome into the Autzen Audibles podcast. I'm Matt Prehm. Erik Skopil's on the show. It's been a while since I've been on the show, Erik. It's been a while since we've done a show together.
Hmm.
It's good to be back. It's days away from Oregon speaking at Big Ten Media Day. It looks like the SEC is going on right now. The Mountain West is going on right now. I think the Big 12 is either just recently completed or they're in their final stages. So we're in the Media Day kind of cycle. So football is right around the corner. We do know Oregon football will be hosting their own Media Day here in a couple of weeks. We have the date. It's not been publicized yet, so we won't put it out there publicly, but it's in 2 weeks. You can figure that out on your own. So we're shifting. We're starting to cycle over to the full football focused in season. What's happening on the field? Discussion points. But before we fully transition over, there's still a lot of recruiting going on, and it's been a while since we've done a show. And in that time frame, the Oregon Ducks have significantly improved their 2026 recruiting class. I think last time I was on the show, they had a ranking that was outside the top 25. They had lost a couple of verbal commitments. Players had flipped. Players had opened things up. Uh, since then, they've added a handful of guys. Coley Kelly, a three-star defensive tackle or a three-star offensive lineman, has flipped from California to Oregon. They've been able to land a Bryson Beaver, a four-star quarterback who was at the Elite 11. Devin Jackson, a safety from the state of Florida, a four-star prospect. He is committed to Oregon. And now most recently, those are all big ones, but like two massive ones. Jalen Lott from Panther Creek High School in Frisco, Texas. He is the highest rated four-star commit in the four-star prospect in the 2026 class, 33rd overall. The 32nd player in the country is a five-star, so he is on the cusp of becoming a five-star. He committed to Oregon as a receiver. And then Emmanuel Nacho, an offensive lineman, offensive tackle out of Maryland, Georgetown Prep. He is the 23rd best player in the country, the number 2 offensive tackle in the country. He is also committed to the Ducks. And quite frankly, Erik, Oregon went from hey, it's a really good class by per recruit average. It's top 10 in the country, top 5 in the country, but don't focus on the overall team rankings just because they don't have a lot of guys. We'll see what happens to now 14 verbal commitments. That average per recruit ranking is like number 2 in the country, if not number 1. I can't remember if they passed LSU or not. And they're now currently 11th in the country. And all is well again for Oregon recruiting. The freakouts of the summer were just that, freakouts of the summer.
Yeah, Oregon is number one on the by recruit average, 11th in the country overall. It's been really fun and not like so super like unexpected, I guess I'd say. I think we kind of made it clear that like once you get through official visit season and then the kind of direct fallout after that, things will change, and that's what's happened here. And I don't. We didn't mention his name here, but like another addition, 26 is Prince Tavazon, who just announced on Tuesday that he's reclassifying from 27 to 26. I don't think the team rankings, the team
Has not
rankings
reflected that yet.
does not reflect that. Yeah, exactly. I was just making sure. And that's a top 75 recruit in 27. We'll see where they stack him up in 26 and how that changes the rankings. But like, needless to say, like this class is looking, it's not on par with the 25 class, because I was just looking at this a couple of days ago that like after Decorian Moore committed, which was I think on July 4th last year, and Emmanuel Hihanacho, which by the way, he can we use the nickname Nacho now? Because he
Yes.
corrected Pat McAfee and said it's Hihanacho, which is not Nacho, but like we got to stick with that nickname, right, Matt? Like it's too good.
I think you have to stick with Nacho, even if it's kind of one of those. Unfortunately, like I have I have a similar nickname that's not even close to my pronunciation that people call me, and it's just kind of what you have to stick with.
Yeah. Us weird last namers are used to being treated strangely because of our names. No, but regardless of like how you want to cut it and slice it, like this class is not quite what they were a year ago, where they were I think fifth in the country when Decorian were committed. They were inside the top 10 when Ihanacho, I'm having a hard time remembering that one because it's been so stuck in my head. Committed, I think they jumped into 8th and now at 11. But like this is headed in the direction you wanted. There has been, as Matt said, some recruiting ranking adjustments. I think the fact that you can look up and say like Jet Washington, Emmanuel Ihanacho are both 5 stars, and then Jalen Lott's right on the cusp. Kendra Harrison is by some outlets. Bryson Beaver, I think by Rivals, is like the 44th best recruit in the country now, which is right in that. Like, there's just a lot of momentum right now that you feel, and you look at the class, and there are some holes, but like certainly not as many. Like Oregon's landed 3 offensive line recruits since the last time Matt and I podcasted. I mean, like that position looked like there were a lot of question marks, and now when you've got
Now it's totally fine.
yeah, Ihanacho's in the fold, and Tommy Tofi, who I don't know if you mentioned earlier when you were running through the names who've been added, like that's a really big time guy who's a top 70 recruit now in the updated 24/7 sports ranking. So yeah, you look around, you go like this looks a lot healthier than it did before. I think the one position, Matt, maybe this is kind of a natural transition. If like you're looking up and down the roster, I guess there are 2 that they haven't filled at all, and that's linebacker and cornerback. And linebacker feels maybe worth touching on, Matt, just because in the last 48 hours, there's been, well, one commitment of a top prospect elsewhere, and we're expecting another later today when Nick Abrams II makes his decision. That position, I know that, I guess I shouldn't say they don't have a commitment. Tristan Phillips is committed, but like they feel like there's a need there still, right?
Yeah, like they, excuse me, only having one, and they only signed one the previous cycle. That's where it makes
True.
it really interesting. Is they signed Gavin Nixon 2025. They did load up and take 3 really high talented, highly regarded guys in 2024. They all 3 of them redshirted. I think Michalowski, the linebackers coach, Tosh Lupoy, the defense coordinator, and Lanning, obviously the head coach, during spring ball, they like made it very clear, like, we didn't go out to add to the portal because of the confidence we have in those 3 young men to be capable players and contributors to this team in 2025. And naturally, that would carry over to 2026 when Bryce Becker moves on. He's the only senior on roster at the linebacker position. But like, I wonder what happens like a Devin Jackson. Let's say Devin Jackson just everything clicks, the production clicks, he stays healthy the entire season, and he just dominates. And he's a junior. Does he go pro? I think that's a real scenario you have to look at because he is a physical freak. He has all
Yeah.
the intangibles to get to the next level, and it's just can you put the tangibles from a physical attribute standpoint on paper with the production? And if he does, which this is the year he's going to get the most reps probably of his entire career, he's going to have a tough decision to make because athletically he's there. So like, what happens if a Dixon or a Jerry Mixon or a Devin Jackson, like if they just blow up and they have a huge year and they go pro, or maybe on the flip side, both guys don't perform well
Mm-hmm.
and they hit the portal, or what if 2 of those 3 freshmen that you were banking on, they don't take the step from spring ball to summer ball to fall ball, and you're like, wow, these guys aren't ready. We need more. They dip. They hit the portal in December. One linebacker is not enough. Like you've gone 1 for 1 player leaving, 1 player entering, but you kind of always want to operate like with an idea of 1.5, 2 players coming in with 1 player leaving, just for the natural attrition that happens with portal, with injury, with retirement, with guys going pro. So yeah, like the linebacker position feels a little thin, especially with 2 years in a row right now as it stands of only signing 1 player. You need to add more. Who that is, that's going to be the tough question. I don't know if there's a name out there. Maybe Nick Abrams pulls a little bit of a shocker. He is close with Iheanacho, and he is Iheanacho's like tried to tease. There's a big commitment coming, a big surprise coming. Maybe he's referencing his fellow Maryland prep standout and Nick Abrams. He's going to decide later today as of this recording. Unfortunately, we needed to record this morning before the afternoon. We'll see what happens there. But if they don't get him, they lost out on Tyler Atkinson. They had a couple other names kind of present themselves, and they didn't get them. Who do they go after from a target standpoint? Do they go portal? Do they try and find like an underclassman linebacker? I think it's important that they add another one, but they're in a weird position where I don't know necessarily if a portal helps you, because it'll help you in the short term, but you're then over recruiting again the three freshmen that you brought in. You're over recruiting Gavin Nix, who you're really high on. You kind of want another freshman guy, another freshman linebacker to get in here to the system to kind of continue the development. So where they turn will be interesting. One name, a couple names that maybe could stand out. Hudson Dunn from Arizona, Bo Jandreau from Arizona. Those are two
Yeah.
guys committed to other schools. Jandreau to Oklahoma, Dunn to Minnesota. Um, Guys, I think Oregon has a good chance of being able to flip if they want. Maybe they circle back and try and change the tune with Tristan Ely, although he was being recruited by Oregon as more of like an edge outside linebacker type guy than a true inside linebacker. And then maybe to the name that you mentioned earlier, the 2027 commit Prince uh, Tavizon, I think that's how you say his name, Tavizon. He's classifying to 2026. He's listed as a defensive lineman right now, but he has played middle linebacker at the high school level. Maybe he's like a tweener. Maybe they feel like he can transition from an edge type guy to being an inside middle linebacker. That will be a thing to consider, but that's a big move. And he's coming up a year early. I don't know if you want to fully bank on that being the solution all the way.
Yeah, and just to make it clear, like the portal makes it's such a safety net to where I know you're right in that you don't want to rely on it solely. Like prep recruiting needs to connect at some point, but like let's say they only land one, and your Devin Jackson point, by the way, just touch on that for a second. I wrote my big question for each position group on Tuesday, and my big question is like, what does it look like with fully realized Devin Jackson? Because guy ran like a 10.5 100 meters in high school. He's great size and physicality. Thought he actually played pretty well last year, specifically on pass downs for the Ducks. He played like I think more snaps than people think. He played like 450. So you're right. Like he's got NFL traits without question. Like I guarantee you, whatever he runs in the 40 is going to be in like the 95th percentile for linebackers. Probably over the last 5 or 6 years in the NFL draft. I would guess. So like, is there a possibility that happens? And if you're replacing two linebackers, you probably aren't recruiting a true freshman to start, but you certainly are hoping you're recruiting a true freshman for maybe some depth. So I agree. That's a position that's interesting to look into and to kind of think about where they could go. Assuming Abrams picks Georgia, which is the kind of the hot pick right now. You mentioned a couple names. I do wonder, like Talanoa Ely is the top rated linebacker on the West Coast. Is that a name that they could get back involved with? He's
Right.
a guy that was kind of like Oregon was in a decent position with for a while, and then USC's kind of turned on the afterburners and done a really good job closing some of these recruitments. Could that be a name to know? And it's at corner though, Matt. Like let's just transition there because I think those are the two positions right now. Because if you look up and down it now, like, and I just did a story a couple of days ago, like quarterback, they've got their guy in Bryson, they've got their running back, obviously in Shadarian Ball, Jalen Lott, Messiah Hampton at receiver, Kendra Harrison at tight end. We touched on the offensive line, maybe defensive line now that Vili Moala's decommitted is maybe another position. Safety, they've got like three big time safety prospects. They're absolutely set there. Corner is the one you can point to and go, they haven't done any damage there. Now you can also say, like, take a step back and look at the roster and go, like, they have incredible young talent there. And like, if it's a position that they quote unquote whiff on in 26, that doesn't mean they're not going to be talented there in future seasons with guys like Offord and Brew and Finney and Ifeoma Badegwu in the fold. But like, where do you like? Who are the names to know there? Like, is that position potentially one where it is only a take one guy if it's the right guy situation? Like, what do you think at corner?
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that they need to go out and find a bunch of guys at that position. Davon Benjamin feels like the one guy they're gonna take. Um, if they get a commitment out of him, he's gonna commit here in a couple weeks. Things are trending towards Oregon's way. He can play kind of multiple positions for you, safety or corner. So I think he's the obvious one. But I look at maybe the safety position, and maybe they try and flip another guy to play another position. And I think Devin Jackson can also probably play um, corner for Oregon as well. He's a safety, 4-star. He's committed to Oregon. Um, so they've got some options. I think Devin Benjamin's obviously the number one, and then if they need to, they've got Devin Jackson who can flip over to corner. I'm curious about Xavier Luis out of
Mhm.
Florida. He's a safety, but he feels to me almost more like a nickelback.
I agree.
Um, so maybe that solves kind of the solution there, but I don't really necessarily think they need a bunch of guys here because they've
Mhm.
recruited it so well the last few cycles, and they've got a great blend of upperclassmen that are proven, that are coming off red shirt. They've got a great blend of young guys that have played a little bit, and then a bunch of dudes that are really talented, either redshirted last year or are entering their first year in the program. And it's let's go out and get a good corner. Devin Benjamin's the most likely scenario. Crystal ball to Oregon, and then see how 2025 goes. And if you're Oregon, it's all right. This is our hole. We think the hole is filled by Devin Benjamin, or this is a hole we need more. Let's go find into the portal. Let's find a stopgap, and we'll solve that problem for 2026 with the portal ad, and we'll fill the back end of it with a 2027 kid that'll give us the long term solution as well.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I think that like on the roster, I know they don't have a commitment there. It's probably the position I feel best about just on the roster going forward. We'll see what happens with all these young guys because like I was just writing again for the biggest question at each position yesterday. Like there's 6 young guys that have no playing experience who are all super talented, and everybody knows like these guys could be NFL caliber players at some point in their career. We just don't know which ones they are. I think it's going to work out. The talent, the cream will rise to the top, as they say, and I just think it's easy to look and say they don't have any commitments. That's a concern. I think it'll work out eventually, but I do wonder like it would be strange to not hit a position in a recruiting class. It sounds like Benjamin's in a good spot for them. I just wonder, like, is this a year where you look up and go, oh, they only took one corner? And then we can talk about, like, hey, well, they took 3 the year before. They were all top 50 kids. They took 2 the year before that. They were both top 150 kids, whatever, wherever Dakota Fields ended up being ranked. So not a position I'm super concerned about, but one just worth noting. Like, it's the only position, in this class that hasn't been touched yet.
100%. And then from there, it just turns into just best player available. Who can you go out and add? Obviously, I think they would love to add a taller receiver to
Mm-hmm.
the room if that becomes presentable, a potential happening. And there's going to be a handful of guys that they've offered that are committed to other schools that they're going to continue to try and flip. You look at like a Zion Ely. This is the number 3 player in the country, the edge player, the number 1 player in the state of Maryland, the number 1 edge player. He's the 3rd best player in the country. Like at one point, he was super high on Oregon, and this is me just totally throwing a name out there, but like that's a guy like you probably circle back maybe if Maryland struggles a little bit and say like, hey, we still want you, we still have room. Would you be interested in coming here? A Jackson Cantwell, currently committed to Miami, the number 3 offensive tackle in the country, a top 10 player overall. Like that, again, like you were right there. You were the 3rd or 2nd best school in his list. Does he engage you at all if you circle back in September or in October to see if he wants to give any kind of consideration of coming back out for an unofficial and maybe you flip him. You go and you look at like a Mark Bowman at USC, a tight end guy. Like, does he maybe show any interest in opening things up? Cody Green was really high on Oregon, was committed to Oregon, and then flipped to UW. Does that door open at all at any point?
I've
They're
got
still
one.
recruiting like Anthony Jones, like an edge guy from
Yeah.
from Alabama. Like he's going to commit, I think August 2nd. Oregon's kind of been in a laying in the weeds type position. Can they maybe finish the job there? Deuce Gerald's, who's a 4-star defensive lineman, like that guy's trending towards Oregon's way, and maybe the more likely scenario for Oregon adding another guy up front along the defensive line. So there's going to be a handful of guys that are still uncommitted, and then it turns into flip season. Like, who can you go out and who can you flip? And because they're going to try, and I wouldn't be surprised, Eric, like if they get one or two guys to flip Oregon's way by December.
Here's just a candidate off the top of the dome that Oregon, was able to trip in June is Calvin Russell, the 5-star from Florida, who's committed to Syracuse, and I'm sure, like I would, and maybe I'll look really silly, and he'll just be, he'll be solid the whole way, but a kid of that caliber going to that sort of a school that's not like the in-state school, it just feels ripe for somebody in the SEC, or maybe it's Oregon, but somebody to kind of to pick that pocket eventually, just because you don't see players like that really go to. I know Fran Brown's done a great job at Syracuse, but that feels like one where when that happened, I went, that's sort of funky. I wonder if Oregon will get back in the mix, or if somebody else will, just because you're talking about one of the best players in the country going to a school that's not necessarily built to produce talent like that. At least that's not been the track record.
100%. It doesn't fit what typically happens, and we'll see what happens. Maybe Oregon can go out and can get them to flip, which wouldn't be the biggest surprise, which would also solve a lot of their receiver questions that they do have left. They aren't major, but they have questions there. Let's transition now to the 2025 season. Eric, you recently do we want to do big position group, or do we want to do predictions first?
Let's do predictions. I think that's the thing I'm most interested to get, I guess, feedback from the fan base. How do they think I did here? What are their thoughts?
Okay, so let's set the stage. You picked every game on the schedule. Were there any like caveats you had to take into consideration, or was it just pure, simple as that? Hey, I'm just making a prediction.
Yeah, it's just making a prediction. I did go through my my off-season kind of vetting process where I look at all the different schools, look at who they're bringing back, look at some PFF grades, look at some stats, read up on some of the players, and like just to try to get a better feel of like which teams feel the most challenging on the schedule. And I'll be honest, like I came away from it going, they've got obviously a really difficult game in September against Penn State, and then I think the month of November is super tricky with a bunch of really good teams. Other than that, it's a pretty doable schedule, and in fact, like I don't know if I don't know if this will be accurate. I guess I should say in December, but I wouldn't be surprised if we come out and say this year's schedule was a little bit easier than even last year's schedule. Which, frankly, if you look back at it, aside from Ohio State, like Wisconsin was tough. There were some tough non-conference games when Oregon was kind of getting their feet settled, but like the Big Ten schedule ended up being pretty manageable. I think we might look back and say like Penn State was really tough, and a lot of the stuff in the back end was kind of dicey. But gosh, it didn't feel like it was necessarily that much more difficult, or maybe it's a similar caliber of schedule.
All right, let's go through your predictions here. You can give a quick synopsis of your pick, and then I'll give some analysis after each one. First one, August 30th at home. Season opener, home opener, Montana State FCS program, who's always a really good team.
Yeah, this was at one point last year, they were the number one ranked FCS team, while Oregon was the number one ranked FBS team. Neither team won the national championship, obviously, but these are two of the bigger programs. Both teams with a lot of changes on their roster. Like I was looking at the Bobcats, like basically lose all their top offensive players, basically lose all their top defensive players. Kind of sounds familiar. This is an interesting offense. Like they run the ball at a really high clip. They had 3 1,000-yard rushers last year. Don't expect this game to be super, super challenging. I will also say, like, we didn't think the Idaho game last year was going to be particularly challenging, and it ended up being more challenging than we anticipated. It was a 10-point final score margin. So don't want to like totally cross this off the list, but I do think Oregon should be pretty comfortable in taking the Bobcats down in the season opener.
Yeah. I like this game being one in which the score is not really reflective of maybe how clean of a game it would be for Oregon. Like I'm talking like 38-10 or something, or 42-17, where it's like, yeah, they look like they dominated, but it really wasn't maybe necessarily cleanest. But yeah, want to know. I don't see any problem with that. Staying at home for a September 6th game against Oklahoma State. When this was scheduled a while back, this felt like a massive game, really exciting. And quite honestly, Eric, like I don't feel like there's any buzz about this one coming into Eugene, which feels incredibly strange.
Yeah, it's kind of a bummer. These are two teams that have been, at near the top of their conference standings for a long time, but just like don't meet on the field. I think the last time they met was it T.J. Ward making Zach Robinson into a sandwich, basically in the Holiday
Yeah.
Bowl. I think I got those names right. I'm sure YouTubers will correct me. But like Oklahoma State lost every Big 12 game last year. They had the worst defense in Power for football, like across the board. I was just doing a story a couple of days ago about this, and it's like they had the worst total offense, the worst total defense, scoring defense, rush defense, pass defense in Power 4 football. Like this was a really bad defensive team. 41 transfers in
It's a
this year.
lot.
The whole roster is basically new. They're very, and I guess because of that, they've become pretty difficult to like really talk about because they are basically a totally different football team. I don't anticipate this game is super scary, but I could also be totally wrong. And Mike Gundy has proven to be a very capable head football coach, and maybe he pulls a rabbit out of his hat. But this feels like Oregon maybe plays Montana State almost closer than they play Oklahoma State potentially. But maybe I'll be completely wrong, and the Cowboys will surprise me. But I don't see this game being one that's real scary at this point.
I've gone back and forth on this one. It's super weird because the way you closed it out, saying the Cowboys are a proud program that is unlikely to fold early. Like I just go back to Gundy's reputation. Last year was such a weird year where they went winless in conference play.
Yeah.
But it's nearly half their roster or over half their roster is new in that recruiting class that they added. Wow, it's a bunch of guys. It's just kind of that bunch of guys. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so we'll
I think
see.
I think they have one 4-star transfer out of 41 guys, by the way.
Yeah, that's not good. Like, if Dante Moore clicks, if whoever wins the quarterback job clicks, and the offense is humming, this turns into a blowout. But if there's some still growing pains on Oregon's side too, then things maybe could get interesting. But I think Oregon kind of walks away with a 2-score or more lead with that game.
Just good point and touch on that. Like we're talking about the opposition mostly on these because that's kind of the natural point. We should acknowledge like there's so much unknown with Oregon, and there could be growing. I mean, last year there were major growing pains the first 2 weeks of the season. This year there's even more question marks on the roster. Who's to say it's better? So I think it's easy to be like, yeah, Oregon with all this talent is going to be much better than these teams and they should roll. I think that's probably what happens, but like we also have to be realistic and say like last year's team was super talented, didn't lose in the regular season, won 13 games, and basically played Idaho and Boise State almost even the first 2 weeks of the season.
Yeah, 100%. Next game, first time the Ducks go on the road. It's also Oregon's Big Ten opener, September 13th at Northwestern. A game that will be played in or on, I think, was like their soccer field or their like a multi-sport athletic field on campus because Northwestern's original stadium is currently being remodeled. It's unavailable. And so they're going to be playing in this like makeshift, really cool vibe stadium on Lake Michigan, I think, which is going to be cool.
And at one point, I thought this was going to be Wrigley Field because they
Yeah.
play, I think, 2 home games at Wrigley every year, and it was like that would be a really fun draw. And now it goes from it's not a famous baseball stadium, it's not even a football stadium. It's so hey, I guess it was destined to be not played in a football stadium.
Yes.
This is kind of a weird team. Like they were not very competitive. I shouldn't say weren't competitive. They lost a lot of somewhat competitive games in the Big Ten. They were not competitive against the better teams though. Their quarterback play, I had it in the story. I think they threw 7 touchdowns and had 11 interceptions, and they cycled through like 2 or 3 guys. They did add Preston Stone from SMU, who is a pretty accomplished quarterback. A couple years ago, he was like an all AAC pick. So somebody who is at least more, I would say, celebrated or capable than what they've had at the position previously. I still would be stunned if this game is particularly competitive. Like it feels like top to bottom, Oregon's got the better roster. And aside from like maybe playing in a weird environment on the road for the first time, it just feels unlikely this game is super competitive. Again, unless like it feels like if this game is competitive, it's an Oregon problem, not a Northwestern, caused problem sort of situation, if you will.
Yeah, I just don't see how Oregon goes, even in a funky stadium with first road game with a new quarterback, some new offensive linemen, a lot of new pieces going on the road for the first time. I just I don't see it. I don't see a loss. I don't. No offense to to Northwestern, but you aren't an elite program. You haven't been an elite program. This is a game that maybe it's not clean, but Oregon walks away with a win where at least when the clock hits zero, there shouldn't be an exhale.
Mm-hmm. That's a good way of putting it.
Uh, Ducks return home after that road trip. They go home. They take on rival Oregon State. First chance for Oregon State to play in Eugene since the Pac-12 disbanded, and now the Pac-12 is rebranded. Um, these two programs passing in the night, like going two different directions. You've got this game as a win.
Yeah, I do, and I think probably similar to last year's game in terms of the margin. Um, they did upgrade at quarterback, like Malik Murphy from Duke is, I
Yep.
think, one of the better transfer quarterbacks, out there this cycle. So I thought that was a big win for Trent Bray, just getting a name to come out and play for a program that's no longer one of the power programs. It's just hard for me to see this game being very competitive in the short term or the long term. It's going to take an incredible amount of work from their athletic department to fund the program competitively, considering some of the disadvantages there that are now, I guess, more fully on display, and B, to be able to like coach it up well enough if there is such a disadvantage, which I anticipate there will be. So yeah, I don't know if it's maybe, I said earlier, maybe it's the same margin as last year. Maybe it's a little closer because Murphy outplays expectation and the offense is better. The defense still needs to improve a lot. Like they were one of, I mentioned Oklahoma State was pretty atrocious last year. Oregon State wasn't a whole lot better. And if you're an Oregon State fan, it's probably frustrating because Trent Bray was the defensive coordinator before being promoted to head coach. Kind of frustrating when the side of the ball that lets you down is the one where your coach is that's his kind of position or his side of the ball, in terms of experience. So don't feel like this one should be super scary. And honestly, like the first four games set up really nicely to work through some growing pains. Like if you just want to kind of summarize those first four in August and September, like we know this roster is super young. There's going to be like 17, 18, 19 new starters, depending on how things, work out. And a lot of them will be players who don't have a lot of experience, specifically at quarterback. This is a nice schedule, I think, just in terms of setting you up. You're not going to play a team that's really even close to your level of talent. You do go on the road, but that road team in Northwestern could prove to be like the worst of the four teams. So I think the first month is really favorable, leading up to the game we're about to talk about, which is the biggest on the schedule, frankly.
Yeah, and that next game is another road game, on the road, fifth straight game for Oregon to play to start the season at Penn State, September 27th, across the country. It's going to be a night game. I think it's like 5 p.m. Pacific time, 8 p.m. local time back east. It's going to be a whiteout. Like this is Penn State already saying back in June or whenever it got released that this is the biggest game of the year at home for them. Rematch of the Big Ten championship game, one that was down to the wire all the way through, and one in which there's going to be a lot of eyeballs paying attention to seeing how good Penn State is, but also a lot of eyeballs on Oregon saying, like, this is their first real chance to see how good they are, how legit they are.
Yeah, and the other part about this is, maybe this is overstepping in terms of, how dire it is, but if you drop this game, you do lose a little bit of control of your own destiny in the Big Ten
Yeah.
championship race because you're not playing Ohio State or Michigan, who are seen as the other two big contenders. And so if you go 0-1 in your, in the possible games against the other contenders, you don't have the tiebreaker. That puts a lot of pressure on taking care of business the rest of the way, which we'll see if that happens. And then, frankly, like it's possible, even if you do take care of business the rest of the way, that those teams in their head-to-head matchups, it plays out where you're left out too. So, not to over catastrophize this game, and ultimately winning a Big Ten championship game isn't a requirement for making the college football playoff. And there's no way an Oregon team with one loss, and maybe even Oregon team with two losses, I think is left out. But this game has a lot of this is a real pivotal game in September, and it's one where this is my one loss prediction here. This is the one game on the schedule. I guess I'm spoiling the rest of the show, but this is the one I have them losing, and I think it's if this game I think was played in November, even in the same venue, I maybe feel a little bit differently. But I look at these two teams and go, I think Penn State has a little bit more of an offensive identity with Aller back, with both Katron Allen and Nick Singleton back. They bring back a couple of their top offensive linemen. Obviously, they lose Tyler Warren, which is no easy task to replace. But like, there's just more there that seems solid or reliable than there is from Oregon's perspective. And again, that doesn't mean that's necessarily how it's going to play out. And maybe the first month of the season will be like, holy cow, Dante Moore is incredible. Kenyon Sadiq, Decory Moore are incredible. No one could tackle Mekhi Hughes. This team is rolling. And then this game plays out completely differently. But I think it's easy, taking a step back in mid-July and saying there's more predictable stuff offensively for Penn State than Oregon. And defensively, it's to me kind of a wash because both teams are losing so many top-tier players while also returning like a couple of really high-end players, mind you, at different position groups. Like Oregon's got Mateo and Tatum and Bryce back. Penn State has I think it's Zakee Wheatley, who's a top safety, and AJ Harris, one of the top corners back. So, shoot, I'm going to blank on the outside, the edge rusher for Penn State, who's back, who was the second guy last year. He's a three namer.
I cannot.
Regardless, real quick. Give it a goog for me. Regardless, like I think for me the difference in this game is just the offense and what both teams bring back and how much you can rely upon it. Doesn't mean this game is going to be lopsided at all, but going and playing in Beaver Stadium is never easy, and it's tough when you think about like this will be Dante Moore's unquestioned biggest game of his career to that point, especially.
Are you talking about Danny Dennis Sutton?
Deny Dennis Sutton. That's who I was talking about. Yes, thank you. I knew it was a three-namer. I couldn't remember the whole name. So, there you go. That's my Penn State spiel. I think it comes down to offense more than defense.
Yeah, I think this is the logical game. Like, if you're going to pick a loss, this is where it's going to happen. I will throw out the caveat that, like, I won't be surprised if Oregon pulls off the upset. Like, they are more than capable of winning this game. And I also won't – I know this is speaking out both sides of your mouth, but I also won't be surprised if this isn't a pretty game for Oregon either. Like, first real test for whoever wins the cornerback job, under pressure, on the road, nighttime, in a very, very hostile environment. Like, would not surprise me in the slightest if it's a little sloppy, if it's a little bad. And they kind of maybe get run a little bit. Hasn't happened in a while at Oregon, but this would be one where they could win. They could also get run.
I agree. I think that's fair.
Next game after a bye week, the first week in October, Oregon returns home, takes on the Indiana Hoosiers October 11th at home. Kurt Sinetti, a guy who has no fear to talk shit.
I love this coach, by the way. He's one of my favorite guys. And it's going to be really interesting to see how he talks pre-week leading up to the Oregon game, because so far it's been fun hearing him talk crap about everybody else, what it's going to be like when the shoe's in their foot.
Yes. This is another interesting game. Playoff team. We'll see how they reload in the second year for Signetti.
Yeah, when I was doing my research, this was the team that stood out the most. I think they're a lot better than I thought they were, to be totally honest with you. And we'll see how much of this translates. Like, a lot of it's going to come down to Fernando Mendoza, the Cal transfer at quarterback. Like, he was very serviceable for the Golden Bears. And honestly, they were a lot more competitive in the ACC at times last year than I anticipated they would be. Lost a couple heartbreakers. But I think they're actually one of the better teams on the schedule. Like, I was doing a ranking of the difficulties of the games. I had this the third toughest game on the schedule over even the USC or the Washington games, a couple of those rivalry games. Like, they bring back their top receiver. They bring back three all Big Ten defensive players, including Mikhail Kamara and D'Angelo Pons, who are both first team players last year. And like these are guys who are seen as potential first, second round NFL draft picks. So it's a pretty talented team. I don't know what to make of them on offense quite as much, but like I kind of think this is a scary defensive team. The fact that Oregon is coming off the bye week is a benefit. I think it's really positive that they don't go Penn State, Indiana, because that's like playing two of your 3 or 4 best teams in consecutive weeks. I think that bye week is significant. Oregon playing at home, it's really hard for me to bet against them at any point at this point. So I've got them winning. I just think this is sneaky, maybe a little tougher game than people want to give it credit for right now.
I've got this strange feeling that while I do agree he's going to have them playing well, there was also a stark difference between when they got into the playoffs and they played a legit team.
That's true.
At home, I think this is going to be one of those games where like the Oregon fan base is going to be pretty turned up. They're going to be pretty rabid towards Indiana, and you're going to kind of be like, why is the hostility towards Indiana?
Well,
like this is such a weird dynamic. But
especially if they're coming off a loss too, right?
yes. I just think this is going to be one of those weird, like, this is really strange. It's super hostile towards a team that Oregon has zero real history with. Outside of that 05 game and
yeah, right.
Live when they came to Eugene and won. But like this feels like a game where Oregon's going to very similar to Illinois this past year, where there wasn't necessarily hostility, but Autzen was just roaring. The team was jacked up. They were fired up, and they just kind of steamrolled a really good, solid Illinois team. I think that same thing is going to happen here.
It's certainly possible. I guess I was just probably surprised more about them than anybody else when I was doing my research of just how many like pretty high end players they have. But you're absolutely right. Like you look back at that Illinois game, I remember our discussions leading up to it was like this could be one of the toughest games of the year. Like gosh, they'd already beaten I think Michigan a couple weeks before, who at the time we still thought was kind of something, and it was 38-9. And no Whittington was like taking a guy's soul at the goal line. So. That's certainly within the realm of possibilities. And frankly, like any of these home games, like it wouldn't be a surprise if they won any of them by 3 to 4 touchdowns, if I'm being honest, even the ones in the back end of the season against some of the better teams.
Another game against a red team from the Big Ten, this time on the road. You're at Rutgers. This one is going to feel absolutely bonkers strange. You're more than likely going to be at this game. Oregon at Rutgers in a conference game. I think it's a Friday night now or something, and or Saturday night game.
Saturday.
Just super strange. Rutgers isn't very good. What do you got?
Well, you mentioned like I'll probably be at this game, and it's because I've got family in New York I've never visited, and who thought work would ever send me back to New York or New Jersey to cover a football game, much less a conference game. So that's weird how that's worked out. The game's like 3,000 miles away from home. Like it's about as far as you can get from the Pacific Northwest. And Washington last year, a much worse Washington team than this year's Oregon team, I think. Dropped this game, it kind of honestly kind of crapped all over themselves, turned it over a bunch, just didn't look ready to play. You hope Oregon is in a better mindset. I think the only way they lose this game is if it's in a similar fashion to what happened with Washington last year, where it's just like your clock's all screwed up from playing across the country. You make a bunch of mistakes. It is a road game, and things kind of just go awry. But talking about defenses like I did earlier, like this is another one of those teams that last year was really, really bad defensively. And if Oregon, like again, talk about where Oregon's now playing at this point in the season, October 18th, this is game 7. I think it's probable Oregon offensively is clicking. And I think it's probable this team is playing really, really well at this point. And so I have a hard time thinking that they drop this game. Like if you were to say this was in the place of that Northwestern game, like this is your first road game of the season, and this is Dante Moore's or Austin Novosad or whoever it is, first time as a starting quarterback on the road for Oregon, I might be a little bit more concerned. But I think by this point in the year, they'll have things rolling. And I don't perceive this as a game that's going to be particularly scary.
Yeah, I'm with you. This is going to be one in which I'm sure Washington said the same thing last year,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
they're going to go in there. They're going to play a night game. They're going to steamroll them. It's going to be over before halftime, and I think actually Oregon will be able to accomplish that job. Um, then they get a long flight back across the country Sunday early morning. They'll probably get into town, and then they'll have to immediately start prepping for maybe the second biggest game of the year at home, possibly. Wisconsin coming to town October 25th. These two teams played last year in late November in Madison, and boy, was that a doozy. Oregon barely got out of there with a win, came down to the last play. Nonetheless, another game against another red opponent in the Big Ten, third straight week. I don't know if that's like on
Matt, I hadn't been tracking the consecutive red Big Ten teams on the schedule here, but this is a good data point for us.
uh, October 25th at home against Wisconsin. Kind of ish Halloween. We'll see what happens here.
Yeah, like I don't know. I think the thing that's funny if we're talking about last year's game in Madison, which we were both at, like I don't think anybody there felt like Wisconsin was better than Oregon. And, like I think honestly, like the crowd was surprised, and people up in the press box on the Wisconsin side were surprised the game was as close as it was. That was just a game where I think it was 8 or 9 consecutive games without a bye week. It was on the road against a team that like season had kind of already fallen apart, had kind of everything and also nothing to play for at the same time. This year, I don't know if those factors will be in play, and frankly, I don't know if Wisconsin's going to be better this year. Like they don't have the run game, and frankly, like Luke Fickle's changing the dynamics there. I don't know how that's being received in Madison because, like Matt, like when you think back to Badger football, you think of Monty Ball, you think of all these different Melvin Gordon, you think of all these running Jonathan Taylor, you think of all these running backs that have come out of there, and it's like you look up and you go, they don't have a running back like that this year, and in fact, it seems like they want to throw the ball more. They bring in Billy Edwards Jr. from Maryland, who Oregon faced last year, probably didn't have his best game at Autzen a year ago. I wonder how he'll do the second time around, but this is one of the more prolific passers in the conference. Like it seems like they want to air it out, and that feels like a weird identity for a Wisconsin team. And we'll kind of see if they're better. I, I agree that this is like on paper one of the bigger home games of the season. I think Indiana's better. I think frankly USC and Minnesota are probably both better than Wisconsin this year. But that doesn't mean this game's not going to be competitive because as we saw last year, Wisconsin for whatever reason, and I kind of laid out some of the reasons for why. Um, Played Oregon tougher than just about anybody other than Ohio State the whole season. So I think this is a game that they can win pretty handily, and then they go into their second bye week before the schedule picks up again. But we'll see. Maybe I'll feel totally silly, right around Halloween talking about this game.
I have a sneaking suspicion this game's going to go more the way we kind of anticipated 2024 going, in which Oregon kind of gets out to a little bit of a lead, and it's just too much for a methodical offense like what Wisconsin had last year, which they're going to try and fix and
Yeah.
try and improve, but easier said than done. I got a lot of confidence Oregon's going to look good in this game.
And actually, one thing before we move to Iowa, I hadn't thought of. Wisconsin has upgraded at quarterback, especially considering who Oregon faced last year, because as Oregon fans would probably have to acknowledge, like Wisconsin was probably like C-level quarterback play from beating Oregon last year. It just so happened they were on their backup quarterback who had a really hard time throwing the ball downfield. I think it was really windy there too.
It
But
was.
it maybe if the conditions are different and Edwards is able to throw the ball around, things go differently. I just am not convinced that Wisconsin's going to have some of those fringe advantages that they did last year, I guess.
100% agree. All right. They go back on the road after a bye week following 3 straight games of red Big Ten teams, the gauntlet of the red Big Ten. They go on the road and they play at Iowa November 8th. This could be a low-key upset game for Oregon.
Yeah, so I spoiled it earlier. My only loss in the season is as the Penn State game on the 27th of September. This 4-game stretch in November, it wouldn't surprise me at all if Oregon drops one of these 4 because I think they're playing three teams I think are very capable of being competitive with them. And then even Minnesota's like won 7, 8, or 9 games like every year under PJ Fleck, basically. So like that's like not a program to totally sleep on. Um, I just didn't know which one necessarily to pick for an upset because I think on face value, I look at all. I look at Iowa, I look at Minnesota, I look at USC, I look at Washington. Obviously, Iowa and Washington being on the road, and I just don't know if those teams are actually like on paper teams I want to pick over Oregon because I think Oregon's just probably more talented. But if I were to pick a second loss, I think it would be this one or the Washington game. Like it's not easy to play at Iowa. Like I remember talking to people last year at Big Ten Media Day about like what environments are the toughest to play in the Big Ten, and this came up. Beaver Stadium for Penn State came up as like kind of the two ones that are just really tricky even for the best teams. So I think that part has to be kept in mind. Iowa's defensively has been incredibly compelling and one of the better defensive programs for a long time under Kirk Ferentz. My question is offense, and like here's a huge wild card for me is Mark Gronowski, the transfer from South Dakota State, who was one of the best FCS quarterbacks like the last 3 or 4 seasons. He won a couple national championships. He won the Walter Payton Award, which goes to like the top FCS player a couple of years ago. Super dynamic runner as well as a passer. Like, how does that translate? Like, if Iowa actually has a good quarterback, like this could be a really competitive Hawkeye football team that could give Oregon some real challenges. They already bring back like two of the better offensive linemen in the conference. We know they'll probably find something at tight end that looks awfully scary because that's just kind of what that program has been historically. So I look at this and go like I'm picking them to win, which moves them to 8-1 overall, 5-1 in the Big Ten. But I can also acknowledge like this is a scary game, and probably if you were just to rank them, which I've done this year, I think the second toughest game on this year's schedule. I'm going with the win while also acknowledging like it's possible we get to this game and it looks and feels a little different than it even does right now.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Oregon should win. I think Oregon will win. But this feels kind of like the equivalent of a Stanford matchup where like you're the
Mm.
better team, you're the more athletic team, but just for some reason this game's always maybe a little bit harder than it needs to be. And look, Iowa is they produce NFL dudes on the defensive side of the football every single year. That place is tough to play. It's going to be in November when it starts getting cold. We'll see if it's really windy. That's going to be a tough spot to play. And much like when I wish Jerry was on the show because he could kind of probably communicate this better. But when Oregon went to Iowa for the final game of the Big Ten season for baseball, the final weekend of baseball, like Iowa baseball wasn't this ranked team. They were in first place. They needed to win a couple games to get the spot. So it was already kind of a big game. But because it was Oregon, because it had the O, because it was the green and yellow team showing up, their stadium was loaded with fans.
Yeah.
And that same mentality is going to carry over for football. It's already going to be sold out because Hawkeyes, they really support their football program. But it's just going to be extra importance, just like what it was when Oregon went to Madison last year and we were there and we saw all the tailgates and all that whatnot. Like it's going
Super
to be a
cool.
big deal. That whole weekend's going to be a big deal. That whole day is going to be a big deal. It wouldn't surprise me if it's a night game. It's going to be a tough one. It wouldn't surprise me if Oregon has to kind of claw their way out to find a victory there too. But I've got them winning as well. So 8-1 is Eric's current prediction right now for a record.
I,
At home
Well,
on a
one
Friday.
more thought there. Oh, sorry. I just want to say, just the very last thing. I totally agree with you about clawing out. It would be shocking to me if this is an easy game. That's just all
Yeah.
I will say about Iowa. I just would be stunned if it's like, oh my gosh, Oregon won 35-7 or something.
Um, Next game on the docket is a short week. This is the one that was moved to Friday. It's going to be a night game at home on a Friday night. I hate Friday night football games in the fall. It just sucks for college football. It's a high school day, but nonetheless, Oregon's playing on a Friday night. Positive. You get the weekend off. You get to go do something Saturday or Sunday with no football. If you're looking to go do something as a family or whatnot. But Minnesota comes to town Friday night, rowing their boats. PJ Fleck, a name that was attached to Oregon when Helfrich was fired and really wanted this job, and Oregon didn't really give him a ton of interest. He comes to town for the first meeting since that pursuit of the Oregon job, and quite frankly, this is a Big Ten team that I don't really have a good gauge on. Like they're always 7-5. It feels like They're good enough to get to a bowl game, but they're not good enough to really do more than that.
Yeah, here's PJ Fleck's career record at Minnesota. It's crazy, by the way. He's been there almost a decade. 5-7 the first year, 7-6, and then 11-2, which was a real standout season. And then the COVID year, kind of throw it out. They went 3-4, and then the next 2 years, 9-4, 6-7, 8-5. This has just been a program that's consistently right in the middle and competing for like position 6 to 8 or so in the Big Ten, basically every year. Um, this is also a program that is not competitive against the top schools. I have a stat here. They're 1-9 under Fleck against Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State, and 33-27 against everybody else in the Big Ten. So that kind of lays it out for me, and which is why I do have this as like that's pretty clearly the easiest win in the month of November. But two kind of personnel things to point out. They're going to have one of the better running back duos in the conference. Darius Taylor was is the returning leading rusher in the conference. Almost hit 1,000 yards last year, and then they added Marshall transfer AJ Turner, who led the country in rushing yard average a year ago, averaged over 8 yards per carry. So they're going to have a dynamic duo in the backfield, and then Coy Parrish, I think I'm pronouncing that right, is kind of had a Dylan Thieneman true freshman season at safety last year for them. Was an All-American as a true freshman, kind of a trendy pick to be, one of the better safeties in the country. I think PFF has Caleb Downs at Ohio State as the only safety above Parrish on its list. I think Thieneman is number 3 on their preseason kind of look ahead at the position groups. So they've got some talent there, some top tier guys, some guys that may be NFL players, but ultimately I'm skeptical they're going to be good enough to beat Oregon, especially at this point in the season and at Autzen nonetheless.
Yeah, I have a hard time seeing this game being competitive, to be honest with you.
This feels like it could be Illinois from last year.
Yes, 100%. The downside of that game, you get a short week coming off a road trip to Middle America to play Minnesota on a Friday night. The positive of that is it gives you one extra day of rest, recovery, preparation for the season finale at home. And that's the following week, November 22nd, against USC, a highly anticipated matchup. Two superpowers, two West Coast teams that, quite frankly, don't like each other. Not one bit. Going to be played in Eugene in late November. That always brings up what do the SoCal boys do when it gets cold and gets windy, gets wet? We'll see how that goes. But I anticipate this game being a highly competitive back and forth game. And quite frankly, the biggest game of the year at Autzen.
A hat tip to the Big Ten schedule makers that they finish with USC and Washington for Oregon. I think that's I honestly I wouldn't mind at all if every year you play whatever two, and obviously they're going to play Washington in the closing game every season. But if you were to say the penultimate game every year was either USC or UCLA, whichever one of them they hit, I think it's a great way to end. That they finish the season playing a couple of these older rivalry games. And I'm with you. I think this game has a chance to be really competitive. USC put a lot of equity into its defensive line. They brought in a bunch of big-time defensive line transfers from the SEC that are, 330, 350 pounds. As strange as it sounds, Matt, I'm not sure how good the offense is going to be. And that's not – I'm not saying they're going to be a bad offense, but when we think about Lincoln Riley coach teams, we think of Caleb Williams, right? We think of Kyler Murray. We think of these Heisman caliber, first round draft pick, number 1 overall pick type of quarterbacks. They don't have one of those on the roster unless it's Hassan Longstreet, the true freshman. And so they're kind of in a weird in-between era right now because I think they think Longstreet can be the next great one, but I don't know if he's ready this year. And so I look at this game and go USC might have taken some steps in the trenches defensively, but they also lost 4 really good receivers to the transfer portal. They retained a couple of good ones in Jacoby Lane and Micaiah Lemon. But I'm skeptical they're quite at the same level they've been under Riley. And for them to be competitive and to actually compete for a Big Ten championship, I think Lincoln Riley needs elite quarterback play, and I'm frankly not convinced it's going to be that. And if it's not Longstreet, it's probably Jaden Mayava, who at times was solid last year. But I watched a couple of his starts and kind of came away being he's just a little better than average, in my opinion. So we'll see. They're going to need take a step up at quarterback. I think Oregon wins this game. I agree with you that I think it's going to be competitive, and it's probably going to be competitive almost more just because of this team's history than it is what these teams are on the field. Because I do think Oregon should be significantly better, at least.
Oregon has the better roster.
Yeah.
And then the regular season closes out with a road trip Thanksgiving weekend at Washington. Jed Fish's chance to host Oregon for the first time up as the Washington head coach. We'll see what Damon David does for Washington at quarterback.
You mean Damon Williams?
Right? Yeah, Damon Williams. Sorry. He looked promising last year as a true freshman when they made the change. We'll see what happens with him there at the position at quarterback, and can he make a bigger growth point and make a bigger impact on this game, or quite frankly, does Oregon dominate like they did last season in Eugene? I think it's going to be an improved Washington team, but the question for me is how much.
Yeah, I've got this as a win, obviously, because I have them going 11-1 in the regular season and 8-1 in Big Ten play. I think they're pretty hard to predict because I will say, like, if you look at the skill positions, they're pretty scary. Damon Williams was 16 of 20 against Oregon last year, like threw the ball pretty well. Oregon fans, I know I'm getting to it. That's the whole point I'm going to make here of to why the game wasn't competitive. They have Jonah Coleman back. It's a pretty high-end running back. I know he did play well against Oregon. Again, it's the same reason I'm about to get to. And then they have Denzel Boston at receiver, who figures to be one of the 5 or 6 best receivers in the conference. Like, all of that on paper suggests they should be good, but you can't get sacked 10 times. And Jonah Coleman ran for 3 yards last year on 11 carries. Like, the issue they had last year was they couldn't match up with Oregon at the line of scrimmage. And so I guess it's hard for me to have watched the way that game was played at the line of scrimmage last year and then turn around and suggest Washington has taken such strides that they're going to beat Oregon. I will also acknowledge, like, Oregon had 3 first, second, or third round NFL draft picks on the defensive line. Actually, 1 first and 2 thirds. Those guys are all gone, and those are big parts of last year's success at the line of scrimmage. So, the strength that Oregon had, and a big part of why they won that game so decisively last year, is kind of gone. I just don't know if Washington, based upon kind of the research I did, has really improved that much, at least enough, along the offensive line. And so, like, if Damon Williams has time to throw and is able to go out there and make plays with his legs, this game could get interesting. I also see a world where we're kind of talking similar to what we talked about last year, where it's like, gosh, Oregon just kind of plowed through them at the line of scrimmage with their defensive line, and that kind of changes this game. So I have Oregon winning. I probably would be surprised if it's close to as lopsided as last year, just because it's at Husky Stadium and it's hard to play up there. But I also am, like, not totally discounting the possibility that Oregon, especially again at this point in the season, I think they're firing on all cylinders, and I think the cream is rising to the top. And I think you're going to see this team playing at a really high level. And frankly, I've said this a couple times. I think this is going to be, I would anticipate by the time you get to December and January, one of the scarier teams in the college football playoff field, assuming that they're in that position. I'd be surprised if that game was a loss, and I kind of lean that Oregon is firing on all cylinders and takes care of business, maybe decisively, but we'll see. Some of it's going to come down to how much better Washington is at the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, I was going to bring up what's the mindset Washington has towards the tail end of this season, because their schedule feels very front loaded. They got to go to Washington State the 3rd week of the season. They play Ohio State at home. They've got to make another cross-country trip to Maryland, which proved last year to be deadly for them when they lost to Rutgers.
Yep.
They go at Michigan. So this is a slate of games. They go at Washington State, Ohio State, at Maryland, Rutgers, at Michigan, Illinois, at Wisconsin, in 7 straight weeks of football. That's going to be incredibly difficult for them. And I wonder just what will their mindset be when they get to November, and if they're 4-4 going into November, fighting for a bowl game, fighting for a chance to end the season strong, or what happens if they're worse than that? Or what happens if, on the flip side, what if they pull off a couple upsets and they win at Michigan maybe, and maybe Michigan and Ohio State are their only losses on the year, and they're 6-2 and they're top 25, then their confidence is really riding high. I think just as much as Oregon's health and the momentum they have going into the last game, the mindset of where this Washington team is going to be at based upon the year that they're having could also impact this. But ultimately, like, I think Oregon's roster is still significantly better. I think Oregon's defense will be really good. I think their offense, by this point in time of the season, obviously it being the last game of the regular season, they should have clicked as well. I have a hard time seeing Oregon get dominated. I could see a loss, no doubt about it, but it would be like a last minute drive or field goal or something, just ball goes the opposite direction very late in the game, and you can't and it's competitive the whole way through. But ultimately, I think Oregon wins, and I agree with your 11-1 regular season prediction here. The question then becomes, Eric, you've got them 11-1. Is that good enough to get into the Big Ten championship game?
And that's kind of the point I touched on earlier. I think it's hard to know. So much of it depends on what Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State do, and maybe there's who's the surprise Indiana this year that comes out of nowhere and maybe has an easier schedule and is kind of in the mix. Like if we're assuming they lose to Penn State and that's the only loss, I lean they probably do get in, but I also go like, are we expecting in this hypothetical that Michigan and Ohio State, like, I guess what happens with the tiebreaker for those teams? Like, it could be as simple as if Penn State runs the table, and I don't know their schedule. I don't know who do they play both Michigan and Ohio State this year, Matt? I don't remember.
Don't think so.
Okay, I'll pull it up.
I don't know.
I was just going to say, like, there might be a world where you look up and go, the loss to Penn State ends up kind of like precluding you from playing in the conference championship game.
Yeah.
I'm going to pull this up right now. Penn State plays Ohio State on the road in November, and they don't play Michigan. So I guess you could get to a weird scenario where there's like a bunch of like, what if all those teams beat up on each other and they're all tied? Like, how does that play with the tiebreaker? I guess my simple answer is I think if you're a one-loss team and your one loss is to Penn State, you're probably going to be in there. But some of this will depend upon how the rest of it shakes out. Not some of it, all of it will play, how it shakes out around the conference. I am confident, regardless of Big Ten championship game appearance, that they're going to be at 11-1, even if they don't get in. That's a college football playoff berth team pretty easily. And again, like maybe a sneaky team that's like in that 6-7 range, perhaps if they're not in the Big Ten championship game, that nobody really wants to play and pulls up an upset or two early. So I think the way I look at this season, Matt, is like I don't expect we're going to feel like this is a real national championship contender in September. I think we might feel like, hey, if everything breaks right, the way they're playing in November, maybe we feel a little differently about how they could compete for really big things. Like, I don't think this is a national championship winning team, at least on paper at the moment, just because of all the inexperience. But if they have the right development and everything kind of clicks, like I'm not going to be surprised at all if they're playing really special and good football by the end of the year.
Yeah, I agree. Go 11-1. It just opens the door where you're not in control of your destiny unless some craziness happens in the Big Ten, which could happen. But I think that there's a high probability that you've got 2 or 3 teams that have one loss in the Big Ten. I'd be pretty shocked if there's one team that goes undefeated the entire way through. I was pretty shocked Oregon.
Yeah,
I know even I predicted it, but like it was going to be. It was a unique situation to go 12-0 in the regular season, but we'll see what happens with Oregon. I think it's 11-1 clearly gets you into the college football playoffs, regardless of what happens in the Big Ten championship game. You're going to be potentially hosting a first round playoff game at 11-1, and for Oregon, getting to the playoffs in year one, and then getting to the playoffs the following year with a mass exodus of some key positions and some key leaders, like. Regardless of what happens, again, that's a successful season.
Yeah, no doubt. And I'm curious to see, I don't know if I have not missed a preseason prediction since 2022. So I'm hoping that streak continues. I got them all right last year. I got them all right the year before, with Washington being the only regular season loss. Let's see if we can do it again here. And I think Oregon fans would be pretty fired up if the only game they lose all season is Penn State.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, that's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles podcast. Thank you for listening to the show. We'll be back later this week previewing Big Ten Media Day. Erik is going to go to Las Vegas to check out Big Ten Media Day. We'll get his full recap when he gets back. And then look, after that, shortly thereafter, Oregon hosts their own Media Day event this month. So football is coming. Football will be here shortly. And until the next time, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.